coffee is as cheap as it is because people have made sure that it never gets too expensive. Wine is, per bottle for how many um, ounces a bottle of wine is, people would never imagine spending that much for coffee in liquid form. And
Right.
that's very intentional. We Coffee regions are all in regions that have been colonized. They're all grown by people of color. It's very intentional that we do not pay very much for coffee. If we're thinking about inflation, like coffee should be like 5 times as much as it is, and also scarcity wise, it should also be pricier. Um, but yeah, I try and equate coffee to wine frequently because I want people to realize that gap. The quality assurance is similar, right? But the pay is always lower for some reason. For some reason.
Well, that actually brings up a good point. Because I wanted to ask you the question: what is fair trade coffee, and why is it important?
Fair trade and also organic trade are important. I think they're a great introduction for people to think about paying more and also think about how little money we send to origin for an exchange for such an expensive cup of coffee. There's many hands involved in producing coffee. It's all done by hand. There are very few countries and regions in the world where it is mechanically picked, and even mechanical pickers have their downside. So if you're buying specialty coffee, every single bean is picked by hand, and it's really hard to not get worked up about that when people complain about the price of coffee, because it's like you have been conditioned to think that coffee should forever be this cheap product, and I understand why, but also like there is an ethical reason to why you should be paying more. Fair trade is always paying slightly above. So I would say like fair trade is like minimum wage, right? It's you need to start somewhere, and they are trying to make sure that everybody whose hands touch that coffee gets paid a minimum amount. Um, I would argue that it's a great place to start because I would argue that producers, exporters, everybody who touches that coffee needs to get paid more. But just because you paid a more than you would usually would for a cup of coffee at a cafe also doesn't mean that that person paid their producers a minimum amount. So buying coffee that has a fair trade label on it, you could kind of take a little bit of relief in knowing that the minimum was paid. It's a certification that the farm has to go through. It's a certification that it basically promises along the way people are paid the minimum. And there is the price of coffee fluctuates on a daily basis, and so fair trade is also making sure that no matter the fluctuation of the market, there's always going to be a decent price being paid to those producers. The same kind goes for organic. Usually, organic coffees are pricier, but that kind of has to do more with like, of course, what organic practices means when you didn't use pesticides or you used organic pesticides. Uh, the certification from farm to roastery has to be organic. So you pay more for your coffee, but it also doesn't mean that everybody got paid a decent amount.
It's a good start, but it's not the solution to everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I would love for producers to get paid as much as I get paid an hour. And that's definitely not the case. And it's like, I feel like it's definitely the bare minimum that I can do is continue to advocate for it. It's also the downside to specialty coffee, right? We are paying more, supposedly, we're paying more for the quality that we evaluated, the consumers evaluated. So we have the power to pay people more only if the coffee meets our standards. Um, so that's kind of like I don't know how ethical that is either, but it's definitely a higher price than what people purchase for commodity coffee, which could be $1, and that's devastating. $1 per pound or less, and there's been some really low moments in the past couple of years of coffee being below the C market, and it's devastating. We have producers who they don't benefit from growing coffee. They're in debt from growing coffee. Like what you can make more money um, moving into the city and getting a job. Like uh, there's not really anything for them to be growing coffee, right now in our day and age when there's so many other jobs out there that would pay uh, like $1 or $2 better. Like it's devastating. So there is incentive from the industry to do better and to reevaluate where we throw money into. And I definitely encourage people if they to at least buy fair trade coffee, but also look into the people that they buy coffee from. There should be some information on people's websites or, people you can talk to. I wouldn't say go talk to the barista and ask them how much are you paying for your coffee, because usually the baristas don't have privy to that information.
Right.
But you can always put pressure on companies to display that information. There is a push in the specialty industry to publish how much we pay for coffee. And not everybody's been able to produce that information. And a lot of people are against handing that over to the public. But I think it would help tremendously if customers were more aware of how much we pay per pound.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's a dumb question to ask during a pandemic, and you've already kind of touched on this earlier as far as like the fact that you're sourcing coffee from Brazil thanks to shipping delays, which I think every industry is suffering from right now. But and you've already mentioned obviously pay in general is a big problem in the coffee industry, but are there any other huge issues facing the coffee industry that you see in your opinion as far as like things that people might not know about?
Oh man.
Let's open that can of worms, shall we?
There's so many issues. I mean, it's gotten to the point where we call ourselves a coffee community because we're so desperate for some type of support system that we don't have at our workplaces. Like HR only serves the company is clear to us. There's baristas around the country that are unionizing, not just at places like Starbucks, but like small companies, because there's so many tactics out there of bullying or withholding wages and raises that you run into. And there's baristas out there like myself who've had to like study and memorize workers' rights because you constantly get screwed over. And unless you know that information, you really don't have a chance of not being screwed over, basically. And so there's everything you can think of happening right now. Besides the unions, there's sexual harassment cases, there's wage theft. There's tons of settlements going on with big companies for wage theft and withholding tips. There's so many issues, and I say that the coffee industry has a community, but it's more like a source of resources and protest. It's not like the type of community that we grow up with in here in our communities. You don't get to see these people on a daily basis, but we're all connected through Slack channels and Instagram groups and private messages. We're all doing as much as we can to be supportive of each other, even though we don't know each other. I don't know much about most of the coffee people that I talk to, but I'm providing any support I can when it comes to getting a better position, getting paid more, asking a friend to hire somebody that I barely know because they need a job and they need to get out of their toxic workplace. Like I think whenever I've explained to people that, we don't go to this cafe anymore because of a sexual harassment case that happened there, they're always shocked. They're like, oh, I wouldn't think at such a progressive, laid back industry that you would have those problems. I'm like, it's rampant everywhere.
Yeah, I was going to say you have humans working there, so that means you're going to have sexual harassment and everything else. That's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not even talking about customers. Like,
yeah, I didn't want to make that assumption either of saying that, just because you work in a customer facing industry doesn't mean that sexual harassment, you're insulated from sexual harassment internally too. It's just, yeah.
Yeah. Most things that would be like HR or worker right related are usually just internal. Like it's almost a perk if there's a company out there who extends HR related instances to customers. It's kind of insane. Like there's not a lot of workers' rights that cover customer facing interactions.
Yeah, I remember visiting homeroom in Oakland, and I thought it was really smart that they started a campaign called "Not on the Menu," which is basically a very strong vocalization to say, "Please don't hit on our servers."
Mm-hmm.
And I think more people should know that just because you're bored and or attracted to somebody that you don't know that is literally being paid to be nice to you does not mean you get to hit on them.
Oh, I would love that to be extended to the coffee industry. I feel like there's so many things on our plate that we're taking care of that it's such a simple thing that we should, have in our cafe window. It's so frequent that you get used to it really quickly and you kind of just brush it off really quickly. But like after 10 years, I was like, I don't care if I get fired. Like I am going to stand up for myself.
Listen, old man, I'm tired of it.
Exactly. Yeah, I wish we had a better resource, than just what we have right now. Our community resources, our online resources. Actually, there are groups out there that are raising funds for baristas or just coffee professionals in general to get therapy. I with COVID specifically, when cafes shut down and there wasn't customers coming, and baristas live off their tips as much as they live off their wage. Virtual tip jars were created and raising funds. Even owners were raising funds for the baristas because, when you're laid off, you definitely don't get as much money as you would hope,
Right. Yeah, despite what propaganda wants you to think that we're just living free, but especially in the San Francisco Bay Area where rent is exorbitant amounts, like there's no way that you can survive off of government checks and also pay your rent at the same time.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, I feel like at one point for like a good 5 years, like both my checks in a month I would need to pay rent, and then I was basically buying food with tips. And so if tips sucked, like we'd be eating less. So I feel really, really fortunate to be in the roastery nowadays and have just like regular hours, hourly wage, but it also meant like working during the pandemic and um, sharing tip jars, virtual tip jars, donating to virtual tip jars, and hoping that everybody um, was able to get through it and was able to eat.
Yeah, that's super important. Well, thank you for sharing all that. I think those are all important subjects to talk about, but no, I feel like we need a palate cleanser. So we're not depressed after I finish this call.
You thought you thought coffee was going to be a happy topic to talk about.
Well, I mean, I thought it would be. No, I'm just kidding.